All right, want to see you sent out.
Cool. Give us 1 second. Lynn's just in the bathroom.
No worries. How are y'all doing this afternoon?
Very good. Yeah. Okay, we're good now.
All right, perfect. Is anyone else not ready then? Okay. Fatigue is understood as a personal plight that we need to push through in order to get real work done. Clayton wrote in 1772 that poor children should be habituated to labor and fatigue, such that they will be amenable to constant employment. From its inception, routinized industrial work is intimately tied with the concept of fatigue, where the lack of energy is a problem to overcome through vaccines and other chemicals. Fatigue is not only applied to humans, but non-humans as well. Machines and animals, minds and bodies are all shaped through logistics in order to regulate labor production. Fatigue, however, is inevitable because anything that produce energy will expenditure and depletion said energy. How then do we discuss a subject that is made up of finite energy? Spoon theory and fork theory are two analytics that help explain how we make choices and move through the world given our limited amount of energy. Stern 22. Spoon theory imagines subject made of energy, finite need of renewal. Fatigue was bound up with routines and industrialized work. Clayton wrote that portion to be natural as labor fatigue, weirdness for physical mental exertion, constant fatigue, traverse the human non-fuel fatigue, acts as a regulator, labor power, for chemical sources and vaccines against fatigue. Reason the chemical cause can be neutralized, body can work more effective. Fatigue can be deferred, but breakdown labor power was inevitable. It takes a more sinister shape when applied to machinery, factory work, and industrial shape. Logistical workers must adapt their moves to uniform amount of ceasing motion, mechanically regulate up to the point they intensification workers cease what workers and overly up to the point where they organize resist fatigue. Thus imply the consciousness time shape of the needs of industry. Institutions like school and imagine workers economy force work more discourse about labor and express widespread for the energy the mind of body was dissipating. Extreme modernity, the basic work and its effects on body use, fundamental capital was conceived of as an energy, all come together to form a science of work and motion. Scientists fatigue was the body's like efficiency. Fatigue was a problem to be overcome. Concerns about fatigue still present today. Claimed that modern life taxes subject personal productivity are heard in many quarters. Energy is something more than just a mechanical or human in scale. Anything that have energy can be fatigue. Spoon theory animates this history fatigue from the bottom up under condition and inequality that never knows spoons where something always demands more. Fourth theory is one as a fourth limit that is you can probably cope okay with one fork stuck and you maybe two third, but at some point you'll lose your shit in one more. Fork happens. Fourth theory is important because it has fatigue without other conditions across the mind body. It starts force stress and when stress over the ability to help increase. Fourth theory also challenge the idea of universal subject fatigue, not neurodivergent people might have one set of reaction to the world, people with hormone imbalance, and other people menstruate, third people living out. You weigh the fourth and even those categories see all sorts of diversity with them, including variance over time. M. The absence of phenomenology of fatigue, which uses spoons and forks to describe how every choice we make requires labor on our parts. Getting out of bed, cutting cards, skipping lunch at tournaments all cost spoons, and they're depleted to signify when a subject is approaching or reaches their limit. The way we conceive of debate always demands a normative mind and body which is expected to exceed limits. We must call into question moments and attempts at our organizing which still adhere to a model of productivity that demands a currency and commitment which mirrors forms of corporate time management which excludes non-normative bodies that cannot keep up or results in slow death in the very space they aim to transfer in place. Start 22. Mr. No, with a bunch of spoons in hand and them to affirm you're healthy, you're spoons and never ending supply spoons. But when you have to now plan your day, you need to know exactly how many spoons you're starting with. Getting up at a big cost of spoon, chart cost of spoons, giving lunch cost of spoon. I give a piece of myself every step of the war when I do everything. Almost 2 decades since initial publication. Spoon theory has become legal for records, disability activists, discourse, care work, replenishes spoons for others, but also cost spoons. Those doing the work, keeping aspects of self care, noticing, showing respect for all the ways we push ourselves past our spoons. It is understanding the way we're in constant dance and negotiating how work will disable our security pain window, critique the energy demands, both in feminist organizing. Feminist practice still assumes a constantly energetic, high functioning body mind, certainly not a body mind that are impaired by illness, even a pushing one's body mind excessively and awkwardly critique this fraction. The expenditure is especially important to wake along the way highway passive energy extraction the problem that should be critically when applied to materials of construction when the charge of tending mark capitalism is also necessary to revisit the ways in which energy expression is applied to people. Spoon theory can be used as a political theory of value which prioritizes difference and fatigue in a way that challenges the idea of debate as game care work. Update spoon theory discusses an uneven distribution of energy and ability and understands that care is a process that not only replenishes spoons for others but also costs spoons for those doing the work. Only disrupting the concept of work as a universal category and forefronting independence can allow us to consider the process enabled us to arrive at this moment at the NDT. We must ask ourselves what resources were needed to arrive at this moment, who produced the spoons that are enabling us to debate currently, and what cost. Stern 22. Physical limits to you, human beings, say how much the capitalists can make them work during part of the day. Bioforce must rest, sleep, satisfy other physical needs to feed, washing, clothing, self-satisfies, intellectual, social requirements, spoon theory, updates and expenses. One is buying a car by expending constant work is energy. The thing whether wage or not is the kind of labor conceived here not as a productive power per se, but the power change or rather expenditure of energy. Some people have fewer spoons because they're social positions. Some people also have fewer spoons because discipline start with less labor power will conditional allow the person to arrive there at the moment where we're needing who produce those spoons, how know what costs for those giving care work, it costs spoons for those receiving mail, also costs spoons, especially in institutionalized or other disability contexts or a case where a person was advocate for themselves and others because they do not have an officially recognized disability because of structural racism, sexual ableism, or forms of discrimination and disability. According to illness have thus been far placed at the edge of the current circles of social reproduction, the ways in which institutions care for people, fight for the rights of the disabled, the impaired, the chronically ill goes beyond the struggle for decent work rather than imagine the very framework within pay work is measured like spoon theory and provide analysis of people's obligation more than their spoon theory provides a theory of value and theory of limits, not just bodily or mental limits, also crucially social. And we can think of fatigue as an impossible refusal to ask the question, why is being not enough? And when it is not enough, what does one do? If the only choice is slow down, then how do we readjust our approach to labor? Crib time offers a flexibility that does not demonize the exhaustion one feels and beautifully captures the complex and messy life they're all living. Start 22. Because of this association with sleep and restoration, fatigue is a long-term association with time to exhaustion, time to rest, recovery, time slowing down, getting busy, getting tired, slowing down, speeding extra existential fatigue might sound like a kind of cosmic burnout, absence of energy, live with that's precisely the opposite. Loving not idea fatigue is the impossible refusal, the ultimate obligation, which is to continue being a fatigue, involves slowing down and lingering away, considering that once never fully within itself, has some resonance with crib time about crib time, something be something more beautiful and forgiving. We live lives with just a flexible approach to normative time frames like work schedules, deep night, or even just waking, sleeping rather than bed disabled bodies when time crib time lives and shaping the world for the subject rather than bending the subject to the world, but crib theory fatigue holds problems because it marks the subject out of time with others and out of time with oneself is existential because fatigue is an effect of being alive and continue to live is political because not everyone experiences fatigue in the same way. Crib fatigue, that's how fatigue is supposed to work under capitalism. Also, simultaneously highly impossible expectation attached to a supposition. And but after affirm fatigue that does not resolve itself, sabotage by laziness, being idle, sleeping, and a refusal to engage with the institution on their own term. Refusal is the generative act that affirms alternative way of living, brewing within the uncomfortable question, why not when being is not enough, demands that we reevaluate how we have organized life. This is not a question of individual subject's ability to rest, instead providing an analytic tool for reconceptualizing debates called action. Start 22. Abolishing literature, refusal withdrawal, which is related to aversion, which provides inspiration for political understanding. Fatigue, refusal for withdrawal of labor is often the most fundamental action. Sabotage, going slow, going on strike, idleness, laziness, and apathy, and black states refusing to engage with white institutions on their own terms, any terms that don't get the also image of inclusion, stepping on hardening for motive for Lena, better spoke Simpson, refusal always know for response to oppression, always the living alternative nation, but people refusing to all acknowledge white settler authority from the standpoint of settler refusal might appear like a negative gesture because it refusal demands the settler state to reform for this legal epistemological and cosmological framework, refusal for the institution space and history, the indigenous people choose to build and preserve socialist patterns, collective SPK is a collective response to medicalization, slow turn illness and when fatigue does not resolve itself, such as refusal and reversion, the configuration of the world at this time, the unresolved fatigue already exists, state refusal, non-elective spin theory is remarkable and concept power because of self-separation of fatigue and political theory, fatigue, but therefore trees of form having refused and aversion without active fatigue is just slightly on demand for the word to be read as demand to continue to exist, but enough every time just not being is not fatigue, is the uncomfortable question, why not every time I insist to mass, also fatigue such an impossibility, what the amount of they need to actively affirm fatigue, the capacity will withdraw on the body's fundamental part of what it means for subject to participate in the world, the goal is not fight the resist, eliminate for all things by definition from the honest fatigue, perhaps the only way to get rid of it is yield the right to sleep is reigning political social 97 one of Washington DC Vietnam veterans against the war had the right to continue with present its members do not have the right to sleep. Their protesters decided to give them the desire to sleep. They turn to sleep into forward direct action. They were refusal without having actively refused to usurp fatigue is something that matters to open up space to alterity and nobody makes the basic of political demand of humanology. Fatigue invites a descendant of metaphor for humanology. Fatigue demands a response to other fatigues and unending obligation. Fatigue never just be a matter of self-care. Others fatigue is a horizon for justice universe or even a utopian fantasy project. The one observer fatigue subjects must let the question rest. They need to be present with alterity without demanding full disclosure. In the moment fatigue subjects active fatigue would desire to be left alone, and they would be relieved to be careful to amend this law. For countless other things, I'm comfortable by the possibility you might compare my opinion years for that reason cannot prove to be significant. Refusal entails a collective practice of rewriting the narratives that constitute us. Rather than conceptualizing debate as a game, we should understand debate as life rehearsal, where we dare to invent the marvelous as we create new worlds in the shell. The oldest call refuse to say recognition is a colonial trick that directs all our students to maintenance normality rather than imagination, new wings, and being manners. 21. The pandemic is profoundly reconceptualized the instruction system of lives, bringing us to the French negotiation of the question how we discuss the magic freedom of the task. So in this is the collective practice of rewriting the narrative that constitutes refuting here that nothing can change, and insisting that everything was. We need to continue to cultivate the collective set of practices for finding city, creating opportunities to give the minorities the order of the world, being actually where my present finding opportunities to bring living on the rubric of violence, colonialism, price on as individual as being in the community, whether living being for the building cannot be placed in isolation. And every time you have to consider a relationship between all living things or experiencing climate catastrophe because racial capitalism in a world when the earth is a resource for extraction and exploitation and dominance, building something different, whereas deep relationality, those interactional spaces between knowledge system theory between our lived experience can arise with times of vitality. We coding over the world normality was and is violence, non-chick militarism, capitalism, making the lots of humbles of black and indigenous people, ecological disasters, policing, media, vision code, the 19 hour grossing, unraveling desires, or by slavery, colonialism, global capitalism. We all collectively serve a better planet to serve demands of people committed just to continue to share the world would it take to interrupt this normality. Writing has always been part of the project. Kelly's what's compelled to dare to invent the marvelous we work to create new worlds in the shell of the world. Writing is the take collaborative prosperity of a brighter world. We think about the communities with it alongside the chorus of anti-colonialist and abolitionist war making happen around us. Mark that card at happened around us.
Okay. Open for cross.
Yep.
Cool. Why didn't you sleep in?
Because I had a debate tournament this morning that I wanted to attend.
Did you cut these cards?
Yeah, I did. Lawson did. I don't know if I can say I cut the cards, but
Okay. Like, it seems like you're still doing, like, in your all solvency, you're saying we shouldn't do these things. We shouldn't engage in these things.
yeah.
How
so
are you
the
not
affir-
doing this?
Yeah, the affirmative says that like obviously there are some things that cause fatigue, but we can still engage in those things if they're necessarily enjoyable, right? Like if I find debate enjoyable, if I find the process of being here enjoyable, it's not a question of trying to reduce the amount of net fatigue one feels to zero. It's just a question of understanding how fatigue and labor and work relate.
I don't understand that. How do you get to say that cutting cards and getting out of bed and those things are fatiguing, but then say that you get to still do them?
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Certain versions of cutting cards can be fatiguing, but I don't think.
Which version?
What?
Which
What
version?
versions?
Like cutting 1,000 policy cards would obviously be exhausting and not something that I could do, but I think that the process of writing the.
What is your understanding of fatigue? You said it's good to like understand fatigue. What is your understanding of fatigue?
So
and
we
labor?
say fatigue is understood as sort of a state of weariness caused by things like forced labor or just like work in general.
I mean, what's your understanding? You're saying what current understandings are. What's yours?
My understanding of fatigue is like a state of weariness.
The state of weariness. What's laziness?
A ground state for where we develop relationality and interdependence.
What's
What's laziness?
laziness?
Laziness,
Yeah.
not meeting expectations of hyperproductivity that are put upon you.
What?
Yeah,
does
we would
that
say. So when there's like sort of standards or expectations of like productivity, this was kind of our first card. It discusses how like antitrust or things like Clayton writing that article or writing that quote shows that sort of normative societies put this standard of hyperproductivity onto the people in those societies, and sort of laziness can offer as a refusal of that hyperproductive.
So laziness is good. Laziness is a form of refusal.
It can be. It can also be
Okay.
good.
So laziness is
what?
good?
So what strategies, because your second to last card talks about Black studies, Indigenous studies have already done these things. What new thing does the AF give Black women that haven't already thought of as a way to like combat these forced labors?
Well, so we think that the app specifically uses spoon and fork theory to provide an index through which we can analyze and understand fatigue in the process.
But that broadened index is coming from Black studies, Black women. One of your cards talks about Audre Lorde. It talks about Moten and Hart. These are all Black people and Black women who have already done that analysis of work. What new thing do you give Black women?
act is that process of affirming those things.
That's fine. I'm gonna say. Everyone got it? Oh, yeah, I'm not looking on my screen. Yeah. Okay, but it just went off. It's a video at the top. But yeah, just went off.
Where they taught me this is that we must never forget that economics was the reason that Black people were brought to this country. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Do you understand that? That's what we came to do. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Now, if I right now decided that I wanted to play Monopoly with you, and for 400 rounds of playing Monopoly, I didn't allow you to have any money, I didn't allow you to have anything on the board, I didn't allow for you to have anything. And then we played another 50 rounds of Monopoly, and everything that you gained and you earned while you were playing that round of Monopoly was taken from you. That was Tulsa, that was Rosewood. Those are places where we built Black economic wealth, where we were self-sufficient, where we owned our stores, where we owned our property, and they burned them to the ground. So that's 450 years. So for 400 rounds of Monopoly, you don't get to play at all. Not only do you not get to play, you have to play on the behalf of the person that you're playing against. You have to play and make money and earn wealth for them, and then you have to turn it over to them. So then for 50 years, you finally get a little bit and you're allowed to play. And every time that they don't like the way that you're playing, or that you're catching up, or that you're doing something to be self-sufficient, they burn your game. They burn your cards. They burn your Monopoly money. And then finally at the release and the onset of that, they allow you to play and they say, okay, now you catch up. Now at this point, the only way you're going to catch up in the game is if the person shares the wealth, correct? What if every time you share the wealth, then there's psychological warfare against you to say, oh, you're an equal opportunity hire. So if I played 400 rounds of Monopoly with you and I had to play and give you every dime that I made, and then for 50 years, every time that I played, if you didn't like what I did, you got to burn it like they did in Tulsa and like they did in Rosewood, how can you win?
I don't know too many bootstrap narratives. I know more bottom of the scrap narratives. I know some cotton picking narratives. I know the pushback against progress. Some of us was antitrust before the law. Was a Black company? Was a Black monopoly? Is it Tulsa? Is it Rosewood? Is it not getting loans from the bank? Is it 50 years of catch up to 400 years of slavery? It's not the discussion. The topic as bad as the affirmation of it. The world has proven to be anti-Black. We have heard this statement over, but we cannot be familiar with this statement. It cannot just be looked at as the condition of society. We move on without the discussion. History leading to today has proven that Black people's accessibility to topic has not existed. Even the attempts to bring in Black people into society have proven time and time again the man's relationship was being aborted. Black woman is unintelligible to debate the same way it is not intelligible to white imagination. The current scope of anti-competitive practices produces mental psychic violence towards Black people and Black women, forces us to buy into the bootstrap narrative. This world, this economy was constructed around racial exploitation. For 400 years of slavery, the destruction of our business through bonds, policies, and contracts. How has the topic engaged Blackness relationship to it? What foundation has been constructed for us to engage engage and compete equitably. Where's our generational wealth, our property and land ownership? All this Constitution tells us is here are ways to gain more access to these things through more hard work. We are being systemically and historically denied and set behind due to the exploitation of our bodies to build wealth for the United States first before we can even think of learning how to build and construct for ourselves. This is Phillips in 19. The world future designates a time period, temporary space that is not now, but that is situated ahead of us and is distinctive from times that precede the one in which we are currently situated. Notions of the future that which lie ahead very greatly in traditional indigenous African spatial temporal consciousness. Time experience as a matter of pace and aching to walk in time because we arrive at your destination. African time is also has a backwards linearity. When events occur, they immediately move backwards. Zamani time or macro time, all future events exist in potential time until experience or actualize. These events do not depend on some specific clock, time, or calendar date. Instead, time itself depends on the quality of the event and the person experiencing it. And once the future event is experienced, it instantaneously moves backward into the present and past dimension. Those two dimensions bear the most ontological significance. A person experiencing time partly in his own individual life and partly through society, which goes back many generations before his own birth. The structure of time thus came to be organized discretely and causally into a past, present, and future with fixed events set against a forward moving timeline, one that will eventually come to climatic and chaotic. And maintaining presentism over futurism has been both a defense mechanism against Black communal trauma and post-trauma under the conditions of class warfare and racial oppression deriving from slavery, as well as harkening back to more natural ancestral temporal spatial consciousness. For those deprived of access to the future, they become stuck planning for the present, while the society around them speaks for an elusive or linear progress. The future thus becomes untrustworthy and unpredictable. Hierarchies of time and lack of access to the future informs intergenerational poverty in the same way that wealth passes down between generations and traditionally privileged families. Our futurism emerged to appropriate or redefine notion of the future while actively exploring what the future might look like for marginalized people. For its part, our future lends itself well to exploring pathways to liberation, unearthing our true histories, mapping our future, and understanding our present conditions in the flow of time, because it provides a perpetual bridge between the past, present, and future. Afrofuturism and the Black speculative imagination can be used as a liberation technology to build future worlds. Non-Black imagination in the world building is dependent on figuring Black women as an object of labor and as a resource. Even in debate, our production is not seen as valuable. When will it be our turn to create imagination for ourselves? The imagination of Black women that has been extracted for all these decades is ours to claim. And I took a card out. The global neoliberal project seeks to make transparent identity and unique form of Black aesthetics. Neoliberal structures identify that they will never be able to comprehend the aesthetics of the Black identity. Thus, they seek to destroy what they don't understand. As a means of assimilation, these structures will always prioritize the consumption of the new man as a means of production within their own society. This is in John 11. The colonial era defined an artificial African space because the contours were defined exogenously in relation to political detriments that had little to do with the populations concerned. Contemporary Africa is different due to the immateriality of the imagined community of exogenous centers that correspond to colonial cartography, not in Africa, but were still owned by their respective colonizers. Decolonization fundamentally altered the individual. It turns crushed interstitial spectators into privileged players caught by the grandly in the spotlight of history. His own rhythm brought by new man, new language, a new humanity. Decolonization is the creation of a new man. The colonized thing becomes a man through the process of liberation by proposing and inventing a new way of grasping the world. Questions that aesthetics all revolve around the attempt to actually define African aesthetic. And we'll send this card out after. This is Gibson and 17. Visualizing these identities also contributes to their normalization. It is others them respects their others and potentially destigmatizes otherness. This Afrofuturist exploration offers a way to correct past sexes and troubling backstories, particularly for Black women characters to imagine a new story. Afrofuturism is Black survivors, an affirmative aesthetic and philosophical position that questions how we will survive in the future, not if we will ask what do we need to know, what do we need to know, how do we need to adapt, what knowledge do we need to take with us, what new ways of being do we need to create, and how do we retain our ancestral memory, because the affirmation called for Black survivors, the Black women and girls portrayed in these narratives resist the danger of a single story while incorporating Afrofuturism, thus offering a refreshing, creative, and complicated experience. The Black African diasporic voices at the center and world largely constructed as white and male. They also challenge how people could assume Black female characters should be portrayed within popular culture and invisible, hypersexualized, marginalized, and or regulated mammy and sidekick roles. These controlling images validate racism, sexism, and poverty, and normalize their power as a part of everyday life. Disrupting these images is essential, and it also is also representative of Black feminist intervention. Our utilization of Afrofuturism is one that understands the future is not tomorrow, but how Black women exist in the scope of possibility of time. We understand Black women to be the work that keeps the world moving. We have said no. And I got a minute 20 something. I'm just going case. Yeah. Okay, I'll just go on case. First, I think their understanding of labor is one that they in cross-sex, they were like, oh, we have an understanding of labor. I think their understanding of labor is one that will always write Black women out, because they think their characteristics of what labor and work is the thing of cutting cards when you don't think things are interesting. I think that the arguments that we have made here, even when you think of the Kimberly Jones video and how she talks about how Black people get bombed, or even when Black people want to get ahead, they're always double back or they always move back, shows that labor is not one of choice for Black women and Black people. You can even think of this when she talks about the way how Black people were even brought here for economic gain, that it was never a choice. The 1AC has posited labor, laziness, fatigue as all things of choice, which means that they have a lack of understanding of how Black women are set up and how the world is always pulling from us. This means that we have a better analysis of labor and a better analysis of work. I think the other thing here is even the language of the 1AC. 1AC assumes that energy is some happens when you take those moments of respite, like when you stay in bed or when you don't cut a card. But we understand through what the cards are saying, what Jones is saying, what we are saying, that energy doesn't operate that way, because for Black women, energy is not just when I take a nap, but it's even when I want to take a nap, the world is pulling for me. So it's not about what I do, but rather how the world operates in those instances. I think they need to grapple with this. If not, they should lose. I'm good for cross-ex.
All right, perfect. Ready for cross?
Yes.
First question, how does Afrofuturism as an analytic explain disability?
Explain what was the last thing?
Disability.
Afrofuturism explain disability.
Or how does the negatives analytic or theory of power understand disability?
What do you mean? How do you understand disability? I think the arguments that we're making about Black women, that Black women exist in simultaneously being over-able, but then at the same time disabled in the way the world pulls from us. I also think that if we're talking about ability and disability, then you need to check your affirmative, because it talks about what the body can and can't do. Yeah.
Okay. My second question, on the argument about how y'all's production will not be seen as valuable, how is this a link to the affirmative rather than just a link to normative debate practices?
What part are you talking about of the negative? You said which part?
The line where it was like, our production will never be seen as valuable.
I think that the argument to be made here is that you assume that Black women get to, like, you assume that it is good to like embrace fatigue, and that's very easy to do in debate. The arguments we have made here is that the way debate is constructed does not allow us to just be like, oh, we're not going to do this. That like that's not how it's, or that it always gets judged and scrutinized in a way that the 1AC has not accounted for.
I think that becomes essential to how you're accounting for it, because you're saying that we have an active choice in not doing this work, not doing this labor. The problem is that when Black women say we've done enough work, we are tired, they say we're lazy. You haven't done enough. You need to, and that's how that forced labor comes. So your ability to stop working comes from the fact that you're seen as having done enough work, have been productive enough. And the ways in which Black women's bodies are always scripted is having never done enough, but always being capable of doing enough. And that's where that superwoman argument comes, where we are never given the opportunity to just ignore or rest in the fatigue in that way.
Okay, so I have a question on that, along with the Najami 11 card. This card discusses how sort of neoliberal structures seek to make Black identity transparent. How does Afrofuturism as an analytic resolve this?
Yeah, so the Najami 11 card talks about the ways in which the construction of the new man comes from the narrative that, like, you know, the non-white body needs saving, and therefore like these sovereign entities can save it, can assimilate it. But part of it is buying into this narrative of white futurity that they can become this new man. Therefore, Afrofuturism understands the ways in which that becomes a capitalist project to reinscribe the other as a means of making them labor within these white worlds and white futures. And therefore, Afrofuturism is the disinvestment of those narratives, that disinvestment of the fact that we cannot assimilate, that there's no reconstruction, we'll never be seen as first and always second class. And therefore, we work for ourselves, we do for ourselves, because these types of worlds, these types of narratives will never be able to accompany our whole subjectivities.
That's time.
All right, we're going to start prep.
All right, stop. Oh, we have 8 minutes left. Sorry about that. The order is going to be the F and then the K. Oh, I'll wait for everyone to get back.
We're here.
There's one card that Chase should be emailing out. Did you send it?
Yep.
Okay. Did people get the card? No, not yet.
No.
Okay. Let me know when y'all do get it. Okay. DSRB is good. Toy is good.
I'm still pulling
Still
up the
waiting
card.
on me. Sorry, what y'all say, Harvard?
I'm still pulling up the card.
Okay, no worries. Just let me know. So weird that this says live on YouTube. Don't want to believe it.
All right, I'm good.
All right, bet. Is anyone not ready?
Sorry, what's the order again?
Oh, it's the F and then the K.
Got it.
Cool. If anyone is not ready, let me know. Otherwise, I'll start in a few seconds.
Economic theory can be surmised by Clayton's argument that poor tools should be naturalized to labor and exhaustion still be amenable to constant employment, which requires a biological understanding of fatigue and its attempted elimination through understanding of fatigue for decent working conditions for people with disabilities and reimagining the framework where paid labor and competition is a measure of life. Instead, prioritizing relationality and interdependence is the ground state in which we approach political conversations. The F is an impairment phenomenology uses expensive words to provide an index for fatigue. This provides a tool to describe one's experience of fatigue in the world, which is necessary for articulating the care that one needs to, and locating avenues for spoons to describe the limited amount of energy a person has in a given day, and force to describe the things that push people to their limits. This is valuable for like disabled women who experience more force through things like microaggression and forced masking that Black women are forced to deal with on a daily basis that decrease the amount of spoons that they have available. Care work allows for other people to have the capacity to rest at work and labor to help Black disabled women find time to rest and replenish the energy they have. This is key to world building and changing relationality with each other. Voting Affirmative expands the scope of what constitutes monopolization by accounting for the ways in which energy and how we express it becomes homogenized by existent demands of the political economy. Indexing fatigue is not just the wearing out of the body, but also a demand against the desire for speed and productivity enables rejuvenation for those whose spoons and forks have been exhausted, which is an independent impact that comes versus energy forms the basis for all their possibility. Every time that simply being is not enough, the AF's conception of fatigue raises the uncomfortable questions, or why not, when the institutions themselves demand self-sufficiency. Fatigue suggests this impossibility demands a response to others as an unending obligation, which refuses the kneel mantra of doing more. This form of refusal is good for two reasons. First is sabotage. Refusal is fundamentally, and the most fundamental act of sabotage, withdrawal from labor, sleeping on the job, or inherently generative, and show that refusal is always more than solely a negative act. The act facilitates spaces to affirm the institutions, spaces, and histories that are built as a living alternative to the kitchens of the status quo, going beyond the struggle for decent working conditions. The act sort of reimagines fatigue as in labor as a ground state of life. When fatigue is idealized under state of mind under capital, what is it like to embrace it as a ground state, while we also highlighting the impossible expectations attached to it, maintained through expectations of labor? IDF says that we shouldn't make a value judgment on people's energy. When we think of fatigue as more, what can it lead to? This is an impact because anything else produces serial policy failure. And it means that we aren't able to have the political energy to actualize our politics, because the app sort of gives the emotional intelligence that allows for people to understand when they've reached their limit. They make a couple arguments at the top of case. The first argument, they see that we are understanding of labor rights Black women out. No, we do not. Our argument is that all life is labor, and it's not a question of choices, because our argument is that there are a lot of forced choices that individuals have to make, but only sort of our analysis can account for this. Their second argument about how sort of the 1AC assumes that energy will always happen when we rest. No, this is not our argument. Stern specifically says that some energy does not get replenished for rest, and that there's a thing such as unresolvable fatigue. Our argument, though, is that only the Affirmative has an analysis that allows us to sort of embrace, come to grips with that fatigue and exhaustion, and provided we to navigate those things, which we think is valuable and sort of necessary to sort of navigating those things. The critique. At the top, you should not forget that the 1AC have, and if their theory doesn't disprove the thesis of the affirmative, there isn't a reason to vote negative. If they don't prove our theory of power is incorrect, then there isn't a reason to vote negative, because the app doesn't trade off or delegitimize the labor done by Black women. A large framing issue on this flow is that the app recognizes that different people experience fatigue differently via the tools and procedures that produce it, which means that the app is a useful analytic that can take the time to have moments of world bending where we can recognize scripts that are foisted onto Black women and provide a method that can navigate those scripts, even if the app isn't material. It allows for the psychic navigation that to navigate the things that produce violence. Permutation, you do what you and will do us. Counter narratives can be a useful analytic, but they need to disprove the spoon and fork theory as an intervention in debate is good. The burden of the negative is to have a competitive alternative. The permutation to the app, the alternative in parallel. The app provides the mechanism to provide interpersonal care both now and a way to understand in the creation of future worlds. Ensures that people who need access to things get it, and we also have ways to engage in speculative engagement. Afrofuturism isn't enough. It doesn't guarantee that there's an analytic for disability, sort of proven by cross-sects when they don't have an ability to explain how their theory accounts for disability. Material things need to happen, and people need things to survive. Spoon theory is an analytic, allows people to express what they need to survive, which we think is inherently valued. The aspirin and fatigue for creating an understanding of violent and contradictory scripts placed on a Black identity concerning it simultaneously being lazy and a drain on society while also being hyper able and extraction of its labor being the basis for social progression are not the truth of one's being, which is what the aspirin recognizes and allows for alternative ways to navigate those things. Permutation do both. Defamiliarization is a method within Afrofuturism for well-being, and the affirmative provide an analytic through which care looks like now into the future. Our argument is that it's crucial for Black futurism is the defamiliarization of ability to break down ideals of the whole. This impact is a stronger educational and interpersonal project towards a world that can disability, race, gender, and sexuality are all unstable, mutually conjugated human social construction. That's Schenck 18. The conception defamiliarization, the major non-realist method with Black women's secular fiction reimagines the possibilities and meanings of the categories of disability, race, gender, and sexuality that are thereby change the rules of interpolation and analysis. Defamiliarization is a term used by many scholars in science fiction and speculative fiction. Science fiction exchanges or distances readers from their knowledge and assumptions about what constitutes reality, or to move those questions to those very assumptions. The defamiliarization of disability is particularly important because the typical representation of disability is too easily abstracted in a metaphor for use for issues of lost image or evil that made too solid and steady to easily knowable and recognizable medical biological fact of the body mind. When speculative fiction does for the representation disabilities work through those polarities in the process require the reader to do some imaginative labor as well. Black women's speculative allows for new understandings and experiences of the categories to emerge by representing realist disabilities in non-realist contexts. These fantasies texts push readers to understand disability from the perspective of the main character, not from our preconceived notions and stereotypes. The defamiliarization of realist disabilities in these fantasy texts challenges readers' assumption about the meanings, manifestations, and effects of their particular disability of physical, mental, social, and environmental levels alike, forcing readers to reconsider or think through how they know about what it means to be disabled. Ability is also context dependent. For the desire for identification with conjoinment deformizes disability because it inverts a trope of disability with loss and represents something in separation of surgery. Attempts to cure disability, so loss in speculative fiction is impossible to move between varying states of ability and disability due to changes in body, minds, and spaces. Speculative can depict such movements in ways that possibly prevent individual blame and shame, and they resist the necessity of medical psychological explanations by placing individual oscillation, disability, non-realist, non-human context. Such deformation of disability discourages readers from applying their realist assumptions and prejudices to representations they mind. For example, for mirror or chronic pain, by defamiliarizing multiple social categories in non-humanist contexts, these texts reveal the ways that disability, race, gender, and sexuality are all unstable, mutually constitutive of human social conduction, and permutations are good. Permutation do both. We should get to re-articulate the function of the permutation after they clarify their position in the block. Permutation and critical debates are good. They facilitate critical dialogue. A world without permutation would result in two teams not engaging with each other, foreclosing any possibility of discovering bridges and connections between our theories. This overall stifles the revolutionary potential of this space. Permutations uniquely force debaters to hold to arguments that seem oppositional and tease out where they overlap with one another. This navigation through controversy is vital for both academic careers and just relating to other people who disagree with you on a daily basis. Second is that it preserves critical fairness. Under their model, the next would be a disproportionate amount of debates because we would have no apathy to contest the viability of their links aside from shallow no-link articulations. Third is that method debates necessitate permutations. They test if the method they presented is in fact competitive with the affirmative. The app recognizes that different people experience fatigue differently in the tools, but the tools and procedures that produce those differentiations can be analyzed in the app stream. There are scripts foisted onto Black women, which is the example I gave above, but the app is an attempt to navigate those scripts based on notions of productivity or ability or labor, even if it's not material, it's sort of lost without psychic navigation. They trade off with the app's analytic. Their counter method is able to identify or understand fatigue in its totality, which proves the necessity of the app slowing down and re-understanding how we allocate energy. While energy expenditure is inevitable and often necessary, it's important to reconceptualize how we sort of choose to allocate that energy. Speculative fiction, the example of how organizing around fatigue is able to come to fruition. The intervention of the app where we organize around fatigue is easier access to a world-building process. Example could be Octavia Butler's parable of the sower, whose main character has a chronic illness, but she's able to to travel, create her own religion, or seed, and imagine a world where limitations aren't placed on them. But their arguments about speculative fiction can be, and Afrofuturism can be cool, but they doesn't negate the AF, and the AF has an analytic of care in those, the AF has an analytic of care in those futures and present by destabilizing notions of what it means to be a Black disabled person in the world, imagining a world where Black women are able to survive and thrive on their own and ability to reshape their understandings of survival activity. Which sort of straws are over here. The only other sort of residual thing that I think I need to answer at the top is this argument about sort of the Black women's labor is never deemed valuable within this space. Our argument is that your labor is always already valuable. The AF is the only one that gives an ability to recognize this. Their critique is in the context of status quo debate, which we think that the AF refuses to engage in through the 1AC, which is able to recognize that all of the shit that we do in this debate, everyone is contributing, all of that labor is valuable and important. Our argument is that how can we create moments of relationality and interdependence within these spaces that can forefront the conversation that we have to create new worlds. In order to vote negative, they have to disprove the thesis of spoon theory and fork theory as an analytic through which we should approach the world. If they don't do this, then you should vote affirmative, because we think that we've written a good 1AC and they haven't disproven it.
Are you good?
All right, I'm good for cross-ex, yeah.
You good? How do you, as two white people, help me to understand that my labor is valuable?
Well, our argument isn't that it's our responsibility to help you
No,
understand.
but you said that it is through y'all, the AF, that we understand the value of our labor.
Well, the AF just says that everyone's labor is valuable.
How? How do you do that? How do you know everyone's labor is valuable?
Because I know that the shit that y'all are doing in debate is important. I know that the shit everyone does in debate is important.
Okay, so we talked about the labor and the extrapolation of Black women's bodies and the oppression of those bodies. Are you describing that labor as valuable? Because that's what we defined as labor. That is the labor. Work and labor are two different things. That's the labor. When people pour from us, demand from us, when we have to do certain things or orient ourselves in certain ways.
Our argument isn't that demand is what is valuable. Our argument is that the labor that is produced is valuable.
Wait, the way to what?
That what you do is always going to be enough is our
The
argument.
way that we produce in response to those forced labors is valuable. Do you not see how?
Our argument is, that's not our argument.
Yeah, that's what you just
Okay,
said.
but then you say you affirm all types of labor. We have said that there are forms of labor that are violent and anti-Black and problematic. You affirm those? Because you say you affirm all labor.
Well, no, we said all life is labor. We didn't say that we affirm
How is all life labor?
Because everything we do requires energy expenditure.
So
Do you think that
energy expenditure and labor are the same things? Because if I do some jumping jacks right now, that is energy expenditure, but it's not labor.
We don't, why is that not labor?
That goes against your whole freaking sports theory.
It's okay. It's okay.
No, it doesn't.
How do we know people's limits?
We should assume that people are always at their limits, I guess is our argument. We
Are
don't think
you
that
at your
we,
limit right now?
If people are always at their limits, how do you solve that?
well, we don't necessarily think that we can solve the way that people are at their limits, but we think that the AF can forefront relationality and interdependence through the assumption that people are always at their limit.
That doesn't make sense to me. That don't make sense.
Are you at your limit right now?
I mean, this has been a very exhausting weekend.
Okay, then why do you need a ballot?
We don't think we need a ballot. The ballot just
Why are we here?
No, because this is a bubble round. This is not about whatever.
So you
If
don't
you're
want the ballot?
tired,
You want to be in ELAMs to talk about this affirmative? Yes. The ballot only signals if the research method of the 1AC is good or
Impact
bad.
of sabotage?
What?
What's the impact of sabotage? What does that mean?
Our argument is that the refusal to adhere to normative resolutions is valuable because it sort of shows respect for all the ways that we push ourselves past our limits all the time, and sort of says that that act of refusal can be generative.
is everyone pushing themselves past their limits the same?
Is what?
Is that generative capacity to push yourself past your limit? Is it the same for each person? Like, is
No.
you at your full limit the same as me at my full limit?
No, that's our argument about text.
Okay, I'll take prep. Let's start prep because gonna prep anyway. So I'll just ask the question. If we don't know when people are at different limits and we understand that there are different limits, how do we solve?
Because we
How
just
do you
should,
solve?
yeah, because we should always assume in the way that we relate to each other that people are always at their limits, and we should forefront care and relationality in the face.
And then my other, so what's this care stuff?
We think that care is good.
What does
What does care look like? How do you care for Black women?
We think that care looks like different things in different like
we don't think that you can have a universal description of what care is or looks
How
like.
do you care for
But
Black
how do you
women?
care for Black women? I never asked for a universal description. I said, how do you care for us?
We think that the 1AC was an example that we forefront our relationship of care.
Okay, so if I say that 1AC was terrible and it wasn't caring at all, then I should win because you don't care.
If you prove why that's true.
How are we supposed to prove
That's
as Black
fine.
women that we're?
I just have 2 more questions for you. Why didn't you talk about Black women and labor in the 1AC? I control all Black women and it only came up once and it wasn't highlighted.
Like we don't, because we don't think that.
Okay, that's fine. What's the framing issue on the K, just for clarification?
The framing issue is that our framework argument was that the judge, or that the negative has to compete and disprove the Ass Analytica spoon and fork theory.
Okay, fine.
What were your perms?
The first one was permutation, you do you, we'll do us. The second one was permutation, do the AF and the alternative in parallel. Then we made a permutation, do both argument, which was the Schenck card. Yeah, and then it was just perms good after that.
Start time at 5:30.
Oops. Yeah. Disappear sound. Cool. There's no U cards. It's just gonna be the K. Cool. Yeah, it's just gonna be okay. Anyone not ready? Afrofuturism becomes the way that we create future life for Black women, having agency, being able to discuss what we want is all necessary to have social life, which should be prioritized. You vote negative to affirm a method of Afrofuturism, how Black women conceive of the future, how Black women move through the world and engage in politics, from slavery to sharecropping to Jim Crow. We have observed that this world has never allowed for the creation or futurity of Black life. This is shown through Tulsa and Roseville, where we see that every time Black people build for ourselves, it is bomb, and white futures are dependent on Black labor, and Black futurity becomes radical for both Black life and combating oppressive structures. The biggest problem with the affirmative is their inability to grapple with the manners that fatigue and work interact on racial and gendered lines, and how Black women interact with fatigue. The framing issue is not about their sport theory, because even if true or false, it is a question of materiality. The inability they have to answer during process how they show care for Black women shows that they do not care. Black women will always be the ones doing the labor of care, and we are in a constant state of the unresolved fatigue that they discuss, because the world pours their fatigue onto Black women. Care becomes a laborious activity. I really think that this understanding of labor versus work becomes essential, because they presume anytime that work is being done, it's labor. And I think that becomes a really violent way of understanding labor, because when they say, oh, all the production that Black women do is valuable, it means that all the forced labor that Black women do because of the ways in which society demands from us, and I think you can see this even through a historical lens of just slavery. Purpose of slavery is the fact that white society, American society, doesn't want to do the tilling, the work. They see the Black body as a means of fungibility to be able to do that, to be able to do that work. And that production was still seen as valuable by plantation owners, because it made their markets go up. But that means that Black women laboring for these white futures is the ways in which we're always going to be put in these positions of labor. And I think the ways in which Black women's labor is understood is not the same as just getting up in bed or you having to cut extra cards, but rather the ways in which the world forcibly demands from us. I think this also goes into the ways in which they presume that the care work is not laborious, the ways in which white worlds have maintained their ability to not do work through the forced labor of Black women. I think you can see this even through the means of colonization, as the global South is constructed and colonized as a means of doing work for Western nations, and for the West to all of a sudden show care through the Civility Project as a means of reproducing these forms of labor and forced production, which is the Nizami 11 card, which is dropped. That was very which is not answered by the affirmative. I think also this goes into the superwoman argument that Lynn is getting into, and we did answer the intersection between Afrofuturism and disability and Blackness, as Black women are seen as hyper able and disabled as a means of putting them in a constant state of work. I think battle fatigue really allows us to have a better understanding of the ways in which anti-Blackness interacts with capitalism, the forced labors that Black women have, and Afrofuturism allows us to be able to better navigate that. And I really think that then also takes away how they still fit into their linear forms of time, which is our Philip 19 card, these linear notions of time, because they frame labor as an individual choice rather than the ways in which certain people are positioned in the world. When Kimberly Jones talks about the ways in which Black people were brought in to do the work in the South to maintain these futures, it means that the ways in which Black women's bodies are posited are always going to be that unresolved labor or work, because we are the work itself. We are not workers. We are the work itself. So when we say the commodity says no, it's not simply just we have a re-understanding of our labor. This is very, very important. All of the spork theory, spoon theory, fork theory are from Black women's work of discussing the ways in which their positions in society are in this constant state. Battle fatigue. When we talk about the ways in which we are brought to do capital, our work is never going to be seen as enough. When we take time off, we are called welfare queens. We are seen as lazy. These types of things that they want us to embrace become violent towards Black women and then force us into an impossible position of work. Oh, you want to take time off of work? Oh, you're not a good worker. You get fired from your job. What material thing does the 1AC give Black women that Black women have not already discussed? And I think this really goes into their second alternative, their first alternative card, when they say about embracing refusal, all of their cards talk about Black studies, Indigenous studies, talking about ways in which we need to counter these structures. But what alternative, what solvency mechanism does the 1AC posit outside of this thinking project that Black women have already engaged in, that they take work from and force Black women to do that work without crediting them for that work? And that's how their work becomes labor. What else have they materially given Black women so that when we say we want to take time off, we get paid freaking maternal leave? Black women are most likely not to, or the 38% more likely, 30% of all maternal leave is not taken by Black women. And even if it is taken, it's not paid. When you talk about these material instances in which when we are not doing work, we are criminalized, you become the mammy caricatures in which the mammy is both seen as this not be able to be socialized with and not seen to be cared for, which goes against their whole care stuff, but also is meant to care for the white family. When we look at Black women and the ways they're posited in the white family to be these midwives, midwifery, and all of that, so white women don't have to do work because they get too tired. It becomes Black women's responsibility to both care for white people who don't want to do work, but then also do extra work in order to be responsible for that. And we never get to care for ourselves. And I think this really challenges their whole collective, because you have to remember, this is not an individual action by the 1AC. They are positing a collective movement of refusal of engaging in this fatigue. The problem is there's always going to be a trade-off. White fatigue and white care requires Black women's labor. It will always be a trade-off because of the ways in which Black women have been posited in these societies within white worlds as a means of being able to relegate their fatigue and tiredness to be uptaken. The question is, when y'all stop working, who picks it up? When y'all want care, who is doing the care? When they're not able to answer how they care for Black women, what is the role of Black women? What new thing do you give Black women that Black women haven't already given to themselves? It means that they not only co-opt the language of Black women, their understandings, but also they are never actually giving the capacity for Black women to center themselves in these conversations, nor resolve the issue of labor, in which the fact that non-Black people see Black women's labor as valuable rather than violent towards them is the problem. So whenever they keep saying, we see it as valuable, that is an exemplary, that becomes exemplary of the ways in which there is a disconnect between how Black women labor and how other people labor, which is why when they homogenize this laborious activity, they claim they don't. They're going to come up here and be like, our spoon theory, fork theory, knife theory, whatever the heck, doesn't want to homogenize different forms of labor, doesn't want to homogenize bodies. Look at their cross-sex answers. They're saying that affirmative gives value to you. We give value to you. How is that not the same civility project that we talk about in the Najami 11 card as a way that your work is valuable, therefore keep working for us? We see it as valuable, so it's not violent towards you. It's a form of gaslighting because we are saying it is violent. That is the entire point of the negative, that these forced forms of labor are violent, which is why I think we really outweigh on the impacts and being able to resolve it. They have no solvency on it. And I think the only impact they really come out of is this sabotage stuff. But we talk about the ways in which Black women, even when we take those forms of care, we're still stereotyped, we're still re-entrenched, and that's time doubling back on us. And I think that becomes a form of battle fatigue, even to try and engage in their form of spoon theory or whatever they have. Even when we theorize, even when we tell them your 1AC doesn't encompass us, your 1AC doesn't do this for us, and they're like, well, you need to disprove it. Literally making us work more to disprove that we are not feeling the care from the other team. They are still acting in laborious ways and demanding from Black women to prove ourselves to them, and which means that you really need to prioritize Black women within this thing, because even within their attempt to recognize our fatigue, they'll never recognize us.
All right. Are you good?
I'm gonna quickly grab water.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
All right. First question, I guess you make this argument about forced labor. What's the structure that produces forced labor?
Anti-Blackness, capitalism, linear futurity, like we're talking about the ways in which like Black women are conceptualized by the world. Like, I don't think it's one singular structure. I think the ways in which the world is built has posited Black women to be in a position of consistently forced labor, which is why we made the commodity says no argument, which is also the worker versus work argument.
I guess, why is the AF beholden to that system?
Because like, why are y'all continuously like demanding from Black women?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. One, I think that like when Lynn asks you, how do you care for Black women? And like y'all's response is the 1AC, that's not like exemplary of anything. But I think too, it's like when Lynn says, well, we say y'all didn't actually show enough care. And you're like, well, I guess this debate is about you disproving us. Like you're making, like, if you're all about this collective action for us to be able to care for each other, that means that you have no like redemptive ability to understand Black women. Like, I don't even think it's a question of the starting point. I think like performatively you've shown that like you still demand Black women to prove ourselves to you. Or even when you say, oh, Black women's work is valuable, we're saying the work that we do is violent towards us. So when you find value in it, that's a messed up relationship because it means that you're gaining something from something that is hurting us. And I think that all of those different things means that you really don't actually understand the ways in which you're complicit in these forms of forced labor that Black women continuously can speak about, but will never fully be understood or heard or grappled with by non-Black people because they're the ones who are positing us in these positions.
Okay, I guess what's the bright line for determining if the AF is provided care? Or like, what is the bright line for?
While answering the question, I don't think it's a big bright line, but if you're claiming to like.
Yeah, I think like there is not just the way you answered the question, the fact that you couldn't answer how you help Black women, but I also think it's the fact that you didn't have any highlights of the word Black women in the 1AC. But then once we start talking about Black women, that's when you start talking about Black women, that Black women are always an afterthought, things like that. Meaning that even if you have some form of care for yourself, you never have it for Black women. If you haven't proven to, you already had 2 speeches and we still don't know what care for Black women looks like.
Okay.
Unless it's a perm, which you shouldn't get.
Okay, what's the justification for not getting a perm?
I'm about to talk about that.
That's the one in mind.
But no, I don't have any other questions.
All right. Okay. It's going to be K, which is on perm, and then case. And you could just let me know if I forget anything. Cool.
Lynn, what did you say the order was again?
I'm sorry. I said K, which was just the on perm stuff, and then K.
Okay.
Okay, great. Okay.
Futurism is the way Black women are able to create their own narratives and worlds for how life should look. And it's powerful because it allows Black women to define their own lives and femininities, the gathering collective thought of what should work for us. We move from notions of cotton picking, welfare creating, the angry Black women, which are all stereotypes of labor that the world puts on us, and have defined what it means for us to live and for us to thrive. The examples that even the Gibson card talks about is how we create counter narratives to our own stories and forefront. I think that what the 1AC also, the text of the 1AC also talks about how the ability to say no to certain forms of debate and production of how debate expects us to debate on the topic. When we say no to that form of debatability, it's that form of futurism and how it ruptures space because the world is constantly in demand of Black women telling us to produce in a certain way and do in a certain way. Even if you think of some of their arguments that are on the negative, it's like you can only debate if you contest this. You can only win if you contest that, which is that same framework and rhetoric of you can only speak this way and talk this way. I think futurism is powerful because it breaks away from the demands of how Black people have to present themselves in the world they should live in, but do for ourselves. And I think that
the internal like that all get talks about is white futurity. I think that the affirmative is definitely one of white futurity when you think of the way in which they are never able to cater any of their stuff towards black women or how they solve for black women. They might name drop black women a couple times, but it's not enough to solve when they themselves don't understand the relations to black women. The fact that they have no relations to black women is the reason why they should be voted down, because we have talked about how the labor of black women is one that is different, operates on a different level. So if you cannot solve for us and the problems and the burdens that we face individually, that you have no solvency mechanisms, which is a reason to vote negative on presumption. I also think the great thing about Afrofuturism is it allows us to theorize about through a heuristic of anti-blackness. I think that this heuristic is not better because the forms of labor and expenditure that they talk about are always ones that start with black people. Hence, when Kimberly Jones talks about how slaves were brought to America, this form of labor and this abuse and worker and building of capitalism started at the site of the black woman, at the site of the slave. When we deal with that and we start from that heuristic, then we're able to solve these limits and these expenditures. And I'll get onto the perm now. There should be no perm. There should be no perm at all. You and we do us is not a freaking perm. That's what we're already doing, because black men always have to do themselves because the world doesn't want to do for us. This is also gonna be a don't touch my hair this out on the perm. You should not get to perm because all the things are severance. Hence, you never talk about black women, but then when we talk about black women, you shift out of your position. But I think the other level to that is that a perm will mean that you win, even though it is clear that you're not doing anything for the labor and the lives of black women. The perm do the ab and all in parallels. There's no parallels. This is all intersections, because all that stuff will always clash into yours, because you think that labor and energy are the same. You think that you think that bodies all have the same limits, or bodies operate in the same limits, or everyone is at their limit, when you don't understand that black women are never afforded limits. The reason why black women are never afforded limits in this specific world is because our bodies are always instructed from, which is why we have to conceive imaginations of new worlds and how that looks like and how we will live outside of this one. And I think the problem with the affirmative is that they produce moments of respite and rest. Even after you buy that, they produce those moments of respite and rest. They never understand that we do not want to return back. Rest means that you stop for a second, you return back, but we never want to, because this world is always problematic anti-black choices, which we are winning. I think the other problem they have is turn to both because of this defamiliarization stuff. I think that they don't get this perm because they don't break down any ideals or any concept. This is shown at the way that they understand and conceive of black women's labor being the same as everyone else's. I think the other level to this is that they say we don't articulate perm, and they get to clarify later. That's freaking ridiculous. You're clearly playing the game the same way. You're not disrupting it based off that same language. I also think that all the examples they give of black women is just Afrofuturism, is not index of their method, especially because when they have no clear examples, or they don't talk about black women until we get to talk about their theories as predicated off of extracting labor from black authors, which is it's problematic. Am I good on? Okay, I'm gonna go to case. The term fatigue was invented in 1900s, which was due to human calories and food and the energy that we expend based off of the things we do. So the understanding of fatigue is one that, this day-to-day life and livelihood, we're gonna lose energy. So we need to sleep, we need to eat, we need to do things like that. The argument that we are making is that black people and black women are never afforded that, because if we don't just get, it's not about how much we sleep or how much we eat, because it's not about what we do for ourselves, but rather the way that the world is constantly pouring us, which is why we cannot be of this world, because that pool will always be there. The affirmative never deals with that pool, which means that the stuff will always be happening to black women, which is why you should vote them down, because this is a presumption argument, because they'll never solve for the bodies of black women. I think the other thing here is the double bind. There's a also I want to go into that fatigue argument. This means that the disability stuff also it links harder to them, because they're always focused on the body or the calories or what you can do what you can do in fatigue. I think that we have already made the argument about disability or futurism theory of disability, hence the way that black women's bodies are always at the site of ability and disability, and that functions to the stereotypes of welfare, Mary Saffron. But when we get to counter and produce for our own, that contradicts those things. There's a double bind. Either they cut cards themselves and play the game of debate, meaning they will always be at their limit. Other people in debate are cutting cards for them, which destroys any collective of cutting cards in debate, or which destroys any collective of cutting cards in debate. They do not rupture debate. While they are in the process of refusal, we have to be in the process of work that have to sever the energy relationship of what it means for black women to invest in energy and what it looks like. There's really a all lives type of approach they're taking. They think that all lives operate the same. All lives lose energy, but they do not understand and account for how black women are never those all lives, and how we do not ever get to be seen as the ones who have limits, because we're always seen as limitless, and the world always pushes us to do too much shit. They're rooted in investing back into this world, while we're divestment is too messy, so they get no perm.
We have 8 minutes left.
Okay. You can stop prep at 3:32. Order is going to be case and then K. Let me just get up on the stand and get my photos.
The perm debate going to be at the top or the bottom of the K?
It's going to be at the bottom of the K.
Baylor, is there a document? Okay.
No, there's not. I was just grabbing all the clothes. Give me one second. All right, let me just get some water. Sorry, what was that?
Can you say your order one more time?
Yeah, it's case and K.
And you said the perm is at the bottom, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I'm good.
Anybody not ready? Economic theory is premised on a theory of forced labor that necessitates fatigue as something to be overcome, creating a necessary pathologization of disabled folk. The afterwards counter-analytic of the resolution they use spoon and fork theory disrupt the monopolization of ideology. The resolution necessitates is good for two reasons. One is sabotage reimagining frameworks and ideologies, the key prerequisite for any material action, which means your ballot does have material solvency, but also these sort of K of Afrofuturism can never occur unless you go to App. I will do that more in the K debate. Second, emotional intelligence, changing perceptions of fatiguing, creates more relationality within the debate. The cases we all do here, one, all these are sort of conditions of the status quo, which means if the F has a different sort of analytic of labor then or sort of worker fatigue, then the status quo, at least we're sort of moving in the right direction. Your ballot can still result that the answer to the disability link have we focus on bodies too doesn't this link is really doesn't make sense in the first place. We aren't sort of focusing on bodies in that context, but rather say fatigue and labor are good analytics for everyone in the first place. They say we don't rupture debate. Yes, it can. Balance this or change perception of fatigue and labor within academic context of debate, which the negative argument still hasn't really grappled with. So if you think normative perceptions of fatigue are better than debate, you can still start a vote affirm to challenge that. K debate. Top of the debate, the afters the critique. Fatigue is attached to black bodies distinctly as a result of notions of individualism. Neoliberal progress extends to the strip life started ways. Each of the apps reading of fatigue is useful for creating understanding the violent contradictories placed on the black identity concerning it. Simultaneously being lazy and draper society will also be hyper-able and attractive. It's labor becoming the basis of society. The app understand these as sort of imposed force that black folk can and do navigate through, which performs a 4-second relief rejuvenation is one able to name and dispel or internalized assumption. There is four sort of central truancy and block arguments I have to answer. One is the labor versus work distinction. One, the app disrupts the sort of conception of labor. It doesn't say that just work is labor, but everything we do is labor. Requires energy expenditure, which expands the concept of work, which means any sort of link arguments is in the context of the status quo and hyperproductive scripts. The second is the sort of forced labor argument. You force black women to labor. One, no, we don't. We don't force you to labor. Our argument is about sort of relationality and interdependence. They haven't proven why we have forced them to labor, and why the labor in the 1AC has done is sort of not valuable in the first place. The third argument is the sort of black women can't care for themselves and rest. This is a condition of status quo. They said in cross-links that it's because of sort of structures of anti-blackness, which the app necessarily challenges via sort of fatigue later. I did that up above at the top of the K debate. The fourth argument is that sort of co-option, how we only mentioned one black woman once. They said in the 2C that sort of spoon and four theory is created by black women. We recognize that sort of black women created that. We recognize it's useful analytic for disability. The app recognizes labor and says it's powerful to understand the world of research part that we find valuable. Don't let a sort of two-error spin to using it for the ballot, because losses tell us to win the spoon and four theory is valuable. In the context of the app was valuable. I'll go into the specific line by laying here. They say it's good to sort of create Afrofuturism. There's a couple of prerequisites. One, understanding fatigue as methods of energy expenditure as an analysis is a key prerequisite to Afrofuturism, because it can understand and sort of relate the thought that then gets put into the medium of Afrofuturism, proving the app to prerequisite. They say framing issue materiality. One, research should come first. It does have to be a question. The sort of negative does prove disproving spoon and four theory. Research is the key to come before materiality, because research can help us guide and create better material actions. And also sort of if it is a question of materiality,
materiality only. Care work is a good prerequisite to materiality because in order to do things like sort of Afrofuturism, you have to care for one another in order to ensure a psychic burnout doesn't always occur. They say sort of like we don't understand sort of ways that sort of Black woman labor versus examples presented in the one you see. That was our texture talking about how spoon and fork theory are not universal assumptions like they're trying to claim, but all of our evidence in the context of different spoons and textures and forks that people have. They say Black women are hyperstable and disabled. This is proves why sort of the analytic of fatigue and labor is necessary to sort of disprove this, but also they sort of account for disability writ large, which is a good net benefit to the affirmative. They say we fit into futurism and labor choices and spoon and fork. One, the AF accounts for this and recognizes sort of forced labor as the context of happening in the status quo already. We are forcing people to do labor, but also it proves for why the AF is a useful analytic because it recognizes that all sort of labor is forced and sort of all recognizes all labor is a concept of life, and only forced labor can be resolved by understanding and relationing to hyperproductivity that is occurred. Also, sort of all the examples are to the status quo. The perm argument, you can extend that here, was completely mishandled. Was the defamiliarization perm that you should extend at the top of the debate. The negative has not disproven the affirmative's research methodology. It's a good idea that intervention in debate would not be useful to research practices for K teams at large. The permutation proves that our reconceptualization of spoon and fork theory are a crucial aspect of feminist disability studies, and defamiliarization is just one way this sort of manifests. This card is really good. Black disabled scholars like Sammy Schenck advocate for new understanding of these categories in order to allow for imaginative labor to reconfigure our personal world. Only the permutation would be able to sort of access to access the kind of world building that accounts for fatigue and the kind of work that's necessary for both now and the future. Speculative fiction is one way they were able to prevent shame or value judgment being placed on fatigue, and proves that these two methods are one, not competitive with each other, and two, the affirmative exploitation of disability theories and organizational tool that leads positive outcomes for Black women makes it easier for them to access world building potentialities. No, it's not a question of specifically severance because they have an outline where we sever from for the negative deception. We are using things like Afrofuturism in the context of specifically disability and imaginative labor. Also, sort of the argument about like moments of rest in context of a relationality to the perm. It's not a specific moment of rest. The app isn't telling people to rest, rather it's a sort of slowing down and understanding the ways our energy expenditure. Their answer to the problem to both with is that it's like sorry, what? Oh yeah, actually I'm going to go into the ultimate here, specifically Afrofuturism doesn't sort of understand the analytic aspects. Even if you think Afrofuturism is a good idea or sort of necessary, you first have to grapple with the fact that spoon and fork theory is a helpful analytic. If you can't, like, if you haven't disproved spoon and fork theory as bad, then like you cannot be building negative. That's the end of the debate, because even if Afrofuturism is true and good, it doesn't disprove that, and doesn't disprove why our model cannot be incorporated into sort of Afrofuturist thought.
Taking part. That's time.
The order is going to be K. I'm gonna like talk about K's, but this is K. I'm gonna put framing on the top. Okay. Okay. There are two links that are grossly mishandled, and if we win them, we win the debate. This first is the labor versus work link. The one here specifically says that everything we do is labor. This is not true, as Black women are forced into positions of labor and performance by the world. For example, the mammy are not being able to take maternity leave, which are examples that are dropped or protected to an honor that. This means that I will never solve for Black women because they do not understand that we are forced to labor while others have a choice in their work. They leave Black women work because the work they do becomes equalized under the affirmative. The second link is the trade-offs link. White care comes at the expense of Black women's labor. These are all disadvantages to the permutation. The alternative is the only way to remedy this. They have no reason why futurism is bad. Futurism allows us to have a heuristic of anti-Blackness, which is a better theory than the spoon theory. It gives Black women the ability to create their own world, work, and focus on their own desires by asking them what they want first. They say that fatigue becomes a prerequisite to Afrofuturism, but we're really ahead on this question of fatigue because they really don't grapple with the ways in which Black women are in constant state of unresolved fatigue. This turns their understanding of fatigue because their inability to see how battle fatigue becomes understood and generates all of these forms of violence becomes problematic. Black women are seen as limitless, and our labor is seen as infiniteless. And this is and I think that because they don't grapple with this question about how their theory can understand that, that means their research methods are bad, their education that they're producing is bad. We should not do it. That means that when we talk about Black women being pushed out of forms of debate because of the ways in which the world demands us to work a certain way, we say the commodity says no, that means y'all as judges need to prioritize the how are Black women resolving this situation? What does the affirmative do for Black women? Because we have seen that they have no care for that, which means they lose because all this stuff is about care or work. But we have said that Black women are always ending up doing the care. Black women are always going to end up doing the work and the expense. And that's the Najami 11 card. That's the Najami 11 card when we talk about this benevolent actor. I also think that all the affirmative is one, reimagining, and two, care. What the first part on the reimagine, the first step on the reimagining doesn't make sense because Black women have already been doing that. They literally concede that all their spoon and fork theory is from Black women, which means this is the argument made in the 2NC. The work being work that is stolen becomes labor because it's never solved for or resolved for. Black women are never resolved for, and that becomes violence. So when they concede this means that any permutation except the don't touch my hair this side, that's the Black women are already doing Black women better than themselves than anyone else will do for us because no one else cares about us, and we always have to care for ourselves. And they have not. There's no analysis that they have given to do that. Be able to do that, which means that they maintain that type of violence, and that also means that the perm becomes severance because the affirmative never mentions Black women until we bring in Black women, which means that Black women are always going to be seen as secondary. They are always going to be seen as secondary and pushed to the wayside, and that's the razor and punch argument that we continue to talk about. I really don't see any impacts being extended in here, nor how the affirmative resolves their impacts because these are all impacts that especially impact Black women the most, and they have no ways of materially giving Black women any ability to solve for these things, which I think becomes really detrimental, especially with becomes really detrimental. I also think that the drop to the death of labor because our work is always going to be is never going to be resolved for really becomes important when we talk about even like just the alternative way, like what does the affirmative actually do? I think this also goes into the double bind argument that is also dropped, in which the double bind is that they say that research method is good, doing research is good. They also say cutting cards is bad, doing all these things is bad. They say debate is violent because we have to do all this work, and yet they're still invested in debate. So either they go against their affirmative because they're still invested in these forms of production of work and labor because everything in their mind is labor, so they're still laboring, or B, they're not, and they're wasting all of our freaking time because we want to do this. The work that Lynn and I do, we want to do. Y'all as judges are not wasting your time. You see an value in this, in the work that you are doing. And therefore, if we're going into bubble rounds and they're getting tired of them, just vote them down because they don't want to do this work anyways because it's violent towards them. Then also it means that you vote neg on presumption because at the end of the day, the affirmative is doing nothing. There's no materially new thing that they're giving to Black women that they have already conceded. Black women have already understood, thought of, and enacted on. They also do not actually, and that's why futurism becomes a better method of both a heuristic analysis of the ways that we should understand labor, work, and fatigue, because the work versus labor argument, the work versus workers labor argument is discussing the ways in which debate demands Black women to work in certain ways. But we have said no, that we are not going to produce these ways, things like that. That's the ways in which we center ourselves. I think this then resolves the problems of push out and the forced weight, the forced work, and the only impact that they have coming out is the sabotage impact. But I think they really cannot resolve the sabotage impact because of when we talk about the mammy, the Jezebel, all these different things in which Black women are seen as the super women, where we're both completely able but disabled and therefore not seen to be cared for, but our work is also just seen as valuable, even though it's valuable towards ourselves. That creates battle fatigue. I think Afrofuturism is then us rupturing those types of production that is always forced by us, that we say, no, we're not going to do that work. We are going to tell ourselves, we're going to create care for amongst ourselves because Black women are always going to do better for Black women than anyone else can. Their method is just their method is complete push out because they do not inclusive of Black women. I also think that is why the disability stuff is really more on them because they have no ways of grappling the ways in which different bodies work different ways, that we cannot energize ourselves different ways, that we don't just re-energize and all these different things, that becomes violent towards us, which ultimately you're just voting on the negative both on presumption and also those violences.
All right, we have 3:33. All right, I'm ready to give the 2 AR. Is everyone okay if I go to the bathroom real quick though? Okay, thank you so much. All right, I'm back. The order is going to be the case and then the critique. All right, it looks like all the judges are here. Harvey, all good? All right, but if anyone is not ready, stop me. Otherwise, I'll start in a couple seconds.
Vote affirmative, embrace fatigue as a ground state of life. Your ballot should prioritize relationality, interdependence over the drive towards competition with both the resolution and debate rely on conceded judge instruction coming out of the treaty that the judge should vote after the theory. If their theory does not disprove the thesis of the affirmative, then there isn't a reason to vote negative. We've made a thesis claim about the unlimited amount of energy people have, about the limited amount of energy that people have ability to expend. The app uses spoons and forks its analytics for which people can index and describe their fatigue, which means the app gives the emotional intelligence to describe the way people feel, which is uniquely valuable. Spoons to describe the limited amount of energy a person has any given time, a given day, and force determine the things that push people to their limits. This is valuable for Black disabled women who experience more force through things like microaggression and force maxing that Black women are forced to deal with on a daily basis to decrease the amount of spoons that they have available. Care work allows for other people with the capacity to work and labor to help Black disabled women find time to rest and replenish their energy that they have. This is key to world bringing, changing relationality in each other. They're voting out because they haven't done any work on the question of why refusal or simply being it should not be enough. The app affirms alternative approaches to debate that present new ways of engaging outside of the conflict of strict competition or negation, which is valuable in addition to how we interact with one another, flipping the norm of understanding that work is always good. The app begins with the relationality that sometimes you have no energy to give, but someone giving a speech, and that's okay. And affirms that simply being has to be enough. And says that we shouldn't have a value judgment on fatigue or the amount of energy that one is able to expend. Voting app is a signal by which you can value the opportunity to rest and replenish your spoons, as opposed to valuing those who can cut the most politics updates or get through the most blocks. When institutions demand self-sufficiency, fatigue suggests it's impossible to remember the COVID example of how institutions push responsibility onto individuals, which is impossible to meet those demands. Just existing and being is the only thing that disabled people can do. Anything else results in so that this is why when we say affirm fatigue, we mean care work and we mean refusal. All these analytics are different things, the ways that we can conceptualize our relationship within the space that we think is generative and valuable. Imagining debate and life as a rehearsal, and Mary imagines debate as a space of alliance where opposition is the expected ballot as a referendum on if the app is a good idea, nothing else. If this is the most accessible model to understand the way that people with disabilities engage with this world, because instead of thinking of debate as a performance which necessitates to drive to perfection or to win that results in people quitting, embracing fatigue affirms that what we do is always enough. The value from energy doesn't come from the result of its expenditure, but the practice of rehearsing, which is key to improve muscle intelligence. It's the second impact that you can vote on because the app gives the debaters the tools in the toolbox to know when they're past their limits. We think that this app is valuable, and we'd love the opportunity to further this debate in English, which is the only reason we're asking for your ballots, which sort of answers their double turn arguments about like the case. At the top of the critique, evaluate the permutation first because it was pretty mishandled. It was mishandled coming out of the 1ARX in the permutation spoon and fork theory are crucial aspects of Black feminist disability studies. Schultz advocates for new understandings of these categories to allow for labor to reconfigure our approach to the world that only the permutation do both can access the kind of world building that accounts for fatigue and care work that is necessary in both the in and now of the future, which proves that A, these are not competitive strategies with the alternative of Afrofuturism, and that second, that the affirmative explication of disability as theory as an organizational tool leads to positive outcomes for Black women. It means that it's easier for them to access world building potentialities, even if there's some points of disagreement. There isn't a reason to reject the permutation because our arguments on interrelationality. The speculative fiction argument is an example of the permutation looks like, because through things like the reading fatigue, we can do things like prevent shame and now value judgment based on fatigue, which resolves the link arguments that they go for in the perception of Black women in the status quo. A large framing issue for this law. If the app recognizes that different people experience fatigue differently via the tools and procedures that produce it, which means that the app is a useful analytic that can take the time to have moments of world building where we can recognize the scripts that are foisted onto Black women, and provide a method to navigate those things. Even if the app isn't material, it allows for the psychic navigation of those scripts that produce violence. And the reading fatigue enables an understanding of the violent contradictory scripts placed on Black identity concerning how it simultaneously appears lazy and a drain on society while also being hyper-able and extraction honestly becoming the basis of sociality's progression, not the truth of one's being. If you cannot explain why this is applicable to the affirmative theory of spoon theory, which already accounts for the ways in which labor and energy are differentially applied to different individuals based on not only on things like race but also on ability, then it means that you cannot vote negative because our affirmative already accounts for that. It also resolves the unresolvable fatigue because Stern specifically talks about how there are some versions of fatigue that aren't resolved with sort of rest or replenishment of energy, but only the app is able to resolve for those things because it says that in the face of those things we can still recognize that the work that we do is valuable. To the first argument, the labor versus work distinction, we think that the app is already sort of in the direction of this link argument. The app sort of challenges the conception of labor to not just be work, but rather that all the things that we do contribute to the practice of labor. And then they make this argument unresolvable fatigue. The app already takes into account this argument, which means that it doesn't link to the affirmative, but also which means that which results this argument. The next argument, why the permutation I'm going to do the stuff about debate here. They're arguing about the research methods. The research methods proving, sort of disproving our method does not disprove our method because our argument takes a fundamentally different approach to research. We think that you can vote affirmative absent sort of the materiality of the 1AC because A, we're not able to materially engage with care over a Zoom meeting, but we think that the app's analytic is sort of a good theoretical approach to which we can approach conversations with the world. But also our argument is about isn't about cutting the most cards, but rather just changing our approach to debate to not solely be about who can cut the most evidence or get through the most blocks, but who has the best sort of theory of power to explain relationality and interdependence, which should be a key framing issue. Their next argument, how they have a better analysis. If they do not prove sort of why our analysis are mutually exclusive, then there's no reason to vote negative. They say that they sort of are making an argument that we don't acknowledge the work done by Black women. That is false. We acknowledge that spoon theory is rooted in the Black radical tradition and uses that for the frame through which we understand our analysis. You can extend our argument about the Octavia Butler coming out of the 2AC about how the app is sort of a project of speculative fiction. Good debate, y'all.
Good debate.
Good debate.
Hey Baylor, who does the 2 in?
Lawson's the 2A.
Yeah, 2A, thank you.
All right, we are all in.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Baylor's back.
Cool. All right, looks like everyone's good to go. Nice. Congratulations to both teams for making it this far in the NDT and for a very commendable debate. On a 3-0 decision, the team that will be going on is Harvard. I can start unless anyone else wants to.
I totally start.
Cool.
I just want to say congratulations to both teams. This was a phenomenal debate. And I know it was a break round for both teams. And I'm super sad that that's the case because both teams deserve to be in the out rounds. The AF is wonderful. I thought the 2AC and the 2AR in particular was just really, really good. So I don't want you to walk away from it being a 3-0 decision thinking that you did not put it all on the floor, because you did, and you all were such good speakers in this debate, and I was super excited to judge it. I think that there are a number of arguments that are happening on the flow in the 2NR that are just not responded to by the 2AR. Those are the same arguments that come out in the block, which are also not responded to by the 1AR. And so in the end, I made my decision almost immediately. For example, the trade-off disad that you don't respond to is the death knell for any permutation you could hope to have. And that trade-off argument is basically that white care comes at the expense of Black women's labor, and you are going to have to answer that on point. Other arguments that are really important for me is what the AF does for Black women. And I think it becomes really operationalized in the cross-examination when you can't explain how the AF cares for Black women. And that argument is made consistently by the negative, and it is never answered by the affirmative. And the thing that I think you need to characterize here is that you're debating at the level of what the method of the AF is. And that method is very much so grounded in Black feminist and Afro-pessimist kind of thought, right? With the authors that your authors are working with. But simultaneously, what's happening is they're questioning your performance and participation in the method. And they're questioning whether or not this whole framing of interdependence and relationality is something that you can participate in with Black women. And I think that that's the part of the debate that you all are just missing from the 2AC forward. And that's why all of the arguments begin to really start to stack up against the AF. It's not against the AF's method, it's your participation in that method that's under question. And I don't think you have a defense of why the two white boys who are using these Black women's work to make this argument are building relationality with Black women. And that argument is never made or responded to by the AF. So in the end, I don't think that there is a reason to vote affirmative because I don't think the AF can build relationality with Black women. I think the negative has just done a really good job of getting underneath a lot of the claims that you're making. Things that are also really persuasive to me are things like Black women are already reimagining and that you have stolen their labor. And the only time Black women come up in the conversation is when the negative raises them as a specter that is sort of in the AF, but also simultaneously invisible. And those are things that you're not responding to. Also, the idea that, you know, if as a collective, right, we stop working, the negative raises the question of why doesn't that just mean that Black women will have to labor, right? Because if white people get to have fatigue and get to rest, the way that the system positions Black women would force them to labor on account of the fact that you're not. So those kinds of questions, I think, have to be answered by the negative. And absent those kinds of answers, it makes me really suspicious of what the method can solve for and who the method solves for. And under this circumstance, it seems like, again, all of this rhetoric of push out, for example, these are examples of the way in which you perform the method that results in the push out of Black women. So I think that what you all needed to really think about is you needed to have read some Black women on care and what that looks like, and to have that conversation. Here's what care would look like, or here's the kind of care that we are willing to offer. The last argument I think is important here. Every time you say that they're valuable or Black women are valuable, they have said that when white people value Black women, it is violent. Right. And so you have to answer the next level of that, which is, you know, about what your value is attempting to do and why you're attempting to reimagine value away from that kind of violent dynamic of how white people interact with Black women. And I think that if you had done that level of work, and that would have required so much nuance, and you all were already really nuanced, right? But it's those sort of little small levels of nuance in framing your argument that would have put you in a better position, I think. But I think that you were just behind from the 2AC, and without those arguments sort of being like, I get that in the 2AC, you don't have the fullness of the negatives, like, you know, block link strategy, right? So that really meant that the pressure was on for the 1AR. And the 1AR was going to have to make those distinctions in a way that kept the 2AR in the debate. And I just think that from speech to speech, you all were just losing focus on where the debate was actually happening.
I agree with large parts of what Shanara said. I think that for me, I go into my decision-making process kind of anchoring on to two major focal points of the AF, both the question of labor and the question of care. As Shanara kind of talked about in terms of care, and I'll go ahead and talk about them backwards. I think just the demonstration or the lack thereof of bridging the gap between what is good and bad care, that question in cross-sex is like, all right, you said, you know, care is on your agenda. I'm telling you, I don't feel cared for. What happens now, right? It's kind of demonstrative of the materiality of these relationalities that we're trying to recreate in debate. And so we get an animation of what that starts to look like. And so that then shapes for me, every time you start to talk about care, it animates to me what that looks like down to the 2AR. Then we start to orient ourselves toward it, and we'll go back up to the labor versus work. And then that link ends up being very interesting to me, because I think they have dichotomized the way that we are kind of scooping and grouping what we understand to be this energy expenditure and what it looks like and what it feels like to have some of that force to approach and orient yourself toward that totally different because of the positionality of Blackness. And I think something that is underdealt with, and when I look at this debate and how I'm resolving it, for me too, the block is where it starts to get interesting, because I think the AF just fails to evolve with the debate, right? There's a great 2AC valiant effort, and I'm like, okay, like, what's good? Let's really have this conversation then. And then the evolution of the debate gets lost. And so we see, I'll give you a couple examples of that. One is like, you know, we're talking about these different methodologies and how they match and how futurism is or is not able to resolve some of the things that that the AF's orientation toward labor does, but then they're saying, okay, let's have that conversation about labor, but we're going to do it under the heuristic of anti-Blackness. And that's always a consistent pivot that ends up happening. I'm like, that's another layer or another kind of orientation toward this conversation. The Mammy example, right? The various Rosewood and Tulsa example, like all of these examples then become kind of, again, a lens that I use to understand everything that you're saying. It animates everything differently because a different pivot has taken. So that's what I mean when I say the evolution of the debate. Another example of that would be kind of, there is an interesting kind of attempt by the AF to circumvent what it means to attribute or to highlight Black women's contributions to the spoon and fork theory, right? So they are saying stolen. You're saying, no, we recognize that it's there. And so that's a different claim. Like there's some teeth to then how, you know, we understand how Black women's labor exists there. You like, we see it's there, we got you, we understand it. And they like, no, you stole that. That is theft. right? This is an accusation now. And so that's another pivot that I don't think is dealt with. And so we start to lose the teeth and the traction out of where you go. And every time you say, we usually recognize, I'm like, is you stealing? And so you know what I'm saying? Like it's hard at the end of 2AR, even though I want to give it what you're trying to give it. And so, you know, I'm filtering through these permutations. We have this footnote and this ad that's consistently there. I really don't trust it. We should be skeptical of it because, you know, it's severance. You don't say it until we say it. And then this note, don't touch my hair, this ad, which, I mean, you got to start kind of calling out things by name to start to really feel like you're reconciling things. And so even down to just kind of saying some of the same things, the language is not there. So I think without kind of echoing too much, that's what I want you all to think about, because the AF is good, right? It's just keeping up with the evolution of the debate and how the arguments kind of move and how they shift, because I think the Black responded reasonably in a lot of significant ways, deal with some of these presumption arguments. I don't have you saying the words presumption in the 2AR for real. You know what I'm saying? Kind of stand up to that claim and talk about and contextualize, because you spend a lot of time extending the AF, but it's not layered and contextualized in terms of how the conversation has evolved. So how then do we reconcile the question of what the AF does or does not do in the context of the larger frame of anti-Blackness or Black women in particular? So a lot of good things happen, a lot of valiant efforts. I think a lot of, you know, solidly comparative speeches, but as we started to compare further and further in the conversations, as Shanara was saying, things just kind of started to stack differently. So great job debating by everybody. That's just how it kind of shook out for me.
Yeah, my decision is virtually identical to DSRB's and LaToya's. I vote negative on presumption. Two key arguments that guide my decision. One that isn't really an argument, but is still like very essential to the way I evaluated this. First thing I want to say is I fully agree that it was like the problems really started happening in the block. I think the 2AC was on point. I think you probably should have read more Black disability studies literature just to give yourself some more offense, because even the 2AC was a little bit on the defensive side. It was really in the rebuttals where you pivoted to like full defense, which is like never the direction you want to go in. But throw in like an Aravellis card, for instance, just to really like complicate the way that Black embodiment in particular is a question of disability, which requires the affirmative to understand. That said, I was really persuaded by the negative's critique of the affirmative's theory of labor, particularly the universalization of conceptions of labor, limitation, energy, fatigue, etc., which all are mobilized by the AF, leaving unthought how Black women are called upon to labor. As they put it, Black women are the work, not the workers, which I think was a really persuasive form of contradistinction that helps me understand what the alt is and how it is actually competitive with the AF. I think the example about midwifery was really persuasive to me. And the 2AR or the 1AR don't really defend how all life is labor addresses this. Like your theory of labor is diametrically opposed to the negative's theory of labor. And you are not really garnering any offense off of this. I would have called out like a Cartesian dualist mindset within the negative, in which Black women are capable of sort of they're even saying Black women having the agency to imagine, which falls into their own criticism of Black women not being able to choose to be lazy. You could have called that out as an ableist construction in which Black women are somehow capable of abstracting the way that they imagine from the way that they labor on a quotidian basis. The second argument that I think the negative is winning is that Black women have already gotten what they need out of the AF because they in fact invented the affirmative. The alternative explanation is using a lot of helpful forms, again, of contradistinction, particularly the commodity refusing versus the subject refusing. I think just seems like a qualitatively better version of the AF. And finally, this is the thing that wasn't really an argument, but just like really textures how I evaluate this debate. I don't think I could tell you what spoon theory is after this debate, or I think more importantly, like what the affirmative is bringing to the table with spoon theory. Because like I've seen this thing on Tumblr before. I know that much about it. But like what's new, you know? What is your interjection into debate, into the topic, into this round, and your performance of spoon theory? Why are you bringing something else to the table that's actually, you know, an innovation? Or why should affirmatives not have to innovate? Why is that maybe a form of productivity or call to productivity that you could criticize? So I think you need to get more offense on the flow. Defense does not win championships in left on left debates most of the time. Defend your theory of labor, explain why it's good and why there is bad, and more cohesion between affirmative speeches, particularly the 1AR and the 2AR. That was my decision.
one thing I do want to add in terms of like just low hanging fruit is this argument that's kind of, and it's not low hanging fruit, like it's bad. It's just kind of it was an easy argument to grab and kind of deal with. It's contextualized in a more important argument because it's this research question, right? Y'all say research is good, but then y'all say cutting cards is bad. So either, you know, your laboring is good or whatever, or don't vote for you and then just stop debating and don't go forward. And that's like, yeah, you know, like, and I just also feel like there should be some response to that, some better response to that. I think your ability to going back to the spoon theory and your ability to recalibrate these experiences by using spoon theory to navigate further debates that you participate in, just something that's just like, and also don't try to tell us how our arguments work. We got the spoons to deal with a championship run if we need to, right? So whatever. Right, like something that pushes back on that. Because I'm like, yeah, that is kind of intuitive. It's like, yeah, you know. And so I also wanted you to say, you know, we spend a lot of time talking to the app, but considering Black women did their thing and get like, shout out to Lynn. Shout out to, I want to make sure I pronounce your name right because I don't think we've ever had a personal interaction together. OG.
Okay.
Shout out to you, boo. There's love here. So I want to make sure, even though a lot of conversation and a lot of comments were directed toward the app, that I'm going to make that personal connection because y'all were, you know, throughout the debate, you know, we talked about, for me, the lack of evolution, and the Block was like, wait a minute, now you said what? Let's talk about these things then. And I really appreciated that. So it's love to y'all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just want to say this too, it's okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fire in the 2NC.
Yes.
Like at the top of the 2AC, when the 2AC is like, I don't see why there is competition here or why these two things are mutually exclusive. What's the trade-off here? I was like, yeah, I don't really know what the link is yet, right? And that's what I was thinking during the 2AC. And then the 2NC got up and I was just like, OMG, this is so smart. This is so smart because it's not an obvious way of coming at the ad from you all's research base. Like I was starting to think about it before you started speaking. And then when you started speaking, you was just pulling the link arguments out my head. And I was like, you better go, girl, because it was just so smart and nuanced and thoughtful and engaged and direct and like all about the offense all the time. And that's how you win championships, right? You win championships by staying on the offense. So I'm just proud of y'all because I've been watching y'all since the first year and just, you know, the evolution of thought and the evolution of your skills. So I just wanted to say that you both were amazing, but that 2NC and that 2NR though, money. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shanara.
Thanks, Shanara, so much. Really appreciate it.
It's straight for me.
You know I love him. He just wanted to put his face in the camera. So all right, you got questions on the app?
No, I don't think we have any questions. This was a super good debate, Harvard. Thank you all the judges for all y'all's feedback. It was super helpful.
Awesome. All right, congratulations, everybody.
Thank you.